Hi, welcome to the Triheart podcast. This is Biff LeCup. Tonight we have Dion Harrell from Harrell Moves with featured music by Super Fetch. Hey, Dion.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm Dion. I am native to Dallas, Texas, and I am an American Sign Language interpreter by day and a swing dance competitor by night.
Whoa.
I work in I work in translation localization. I've been at interpreting for about 6 years professionally now, but I've been using ASL since I was about the age of 14, so about 14 years now. And then I've also been competing in dance for about 4 years as well. So that's pretty much all of my time. Anything creative is where I thrive.
That really links a connection for me because I actually found you. It was If You're Racist and You Know It, Clap Your Hands, that video.
Yeah.
I saw that through one of my ballroom dancing friends.
Oh, nice.
So I wonder if you were if your videos were going through that community.
It could have been going through that world and then just got filtered on through. So I'm happy you found it, though. I'll tell you
that. Me too. Is there a lot of correlation between dance and ASL?
I would say in terms of creativity, there's a lot of correlation between dance and ASL. Good body awareness, like that type of thing, right? ASL is all about, or interpreting, I should say, is all about concepts. It's not really about the words that you're legitimately speaking out of your mouth, but the meaning behind the words.
Right.
And whenever I'm dancing or if I'm competing, it's about being able to interpret or express or emote to a song, which could be about, love, joy, pain, drugs, sex, money, whatever, right? So
yeah.
There's some correlation between trying to paint a picture to get a message across. Definitely. So creatively, I would say so.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of, I guess it's a TikTok challenge that you're doing right now where you invite like a bunch of ASL interpreters to do a song and then you're all on the screen all at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, I noticed that everyone was doing something different to the same song. So I thought that was a really amazing concept.
Yeah, I really like those. They call them a duet train on TikTok. TikTok slang. I'm still learning it myself, to be honest. I'm telling you, man, free time is a hell of a drug. So quarantine, man, quarantine gave me free time. So here I am on TikTok. But yeah, no, I love that everybody kind of hops on and does their thing because it just shows. Honestly, I think of it as an accent. You know what I mean? If I talk to
Oh
somebody
yeah.
from New York, or if I talk to somebody from Texas, versus if I talk to somebody from London, right? They could legitimately all be speaking English, but their word choice will be different, their vernacular will be different, their accent will be different. And it's kind of the same thing in correlation to what you see on the screens with all those different interpreters. Everybody has, a certain way that they express literally the exact same thing. It just doesn't have to be done the exact same way.
Would you be able to explain something like that to the non-deaf community? Like if you kind of paired your interpretation and then someone else's interpretation, I don't know, would you be able to tell me the differences in that interpretation?
So if I were to walk up to somebody in Memphis, Tennessee, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever been in Memphis, Tennessee, I swear they have their own language. The first time I went, I was thoroughly confused as to what people were trying to get me to do. But so for example, in Memphis, Tennessee, somebody might say, "Hey, file off on that man." Did you understand that?
No,
Do you
sir.
know? Right. Okay, cool. Right. It took me a minute as well. But, right. So I'm going to say it slowly. A main, fire off on that main. Right. So what they're saying is, hey, hit them for me.
Oh, okay.
Right. So if I were to, both acceptable depending on who's in the room. Right. So to the non-deaf community, it's honestly it's like synonyms. If you were to say gargantuan and I said huge,
Okay, yeah.
we both said the same thing. We chose a different
Right.
word to say it, but we both legitimately said the same thing. Right. It's the same instance if I were, like I said, in Memphis and I said, "Hey, follow up on that man," versus if I was in Kentucky and I said, "Hey, hit them for me." Said the exact same thing. I just, one is acceptable in one person's vernacular and another is accepted in another person's vernacular.
So I guess, I'm definitely coming from like a position of ignorance and appreciation. Like,
I love
I
that.
don't know. Yeah. Yeah. It was just, I don't know what I thought anything was to be, but I was just learning when I realized things weren't literal.
One of the things, and me as an interpreter, one of my pet peeves, like if I'm training other interpreters, if I'm doing any type of mentorship, and shout out to my mentor, Harrell, appreciate you, dog. One of the things that that got drilled into me and that I drill into my mentees is what they call conceptual accuracy. And conceptual accuracy means I don't really care about the words as much as I care about the concept, right? So if you said to me, "What would you like to drink?" Sounds pretty simple, right? In terms of interpretation, sounds simple. What would you like to drink? That's a straightforward question, right? Okay, cool. So if I was interpreting that, I could say there are two different signs I could use. One meaning a non-alcoholic drink and another one meaning an alcoholic beverage. So now I need context, right? I need to understand the concept behind to drink. Are you in a bar and a bartender asks you what would you like to drink? Or are you in a restaurant and you're asking a 5-year-old kid what would they like? Because that's two different things, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's the concept. Or if I said change your tire, what I really mean is to replace your tire. I don't legitimately mean change it as in like change brands. I mean, take one tire off and put a new one on. Because you have a command of the English language, you do that interpretation in your mind without thinking about it.
It's funny. This beginning portion was supposed to be like about you, but we already got off, but that's okay.
So we can always double back.
Yeah, I'll go back. But so when you are interpreting, do you have to take on the interpretation's style, or do you just input your style of interpretation into that translation?
Think of it as like an inflection in your voice. So when you say style, do you mean like somebody's talking with an attitude, like neck rolls and that type of thing? Do I take that personality on? Stylistically, every interpreter has their own style. So yeah, my style is definitely unique to me. While somebody else would be unique to them as well. But I mean, even when I was interpreting you all's music, right? To an extent, I'm not saying what you're saying word for word. There are, I believe, like a little bit over 5,000 signs, not quite 6,000 signs, like in all of American Sign Language. And
Wow.
there are like a million English words. That's it. And there are like, a million English words. So if that makes you're right. So if that makes sense, like I could never say everything that you say in English word for word because there literally isn't a sign for every single word.
Okay, so let's double back more at a look at you. What directed you to ASL?
So I have an older sister. I have a couple older sisters, but one in particular, she's 2 years older than I am. We wanted to talk about our mom when she made us mad. So we tried. There was this show on PBS. It was called Zoom, right? It was real cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It was back in the day, but it was so good. And,
are you talking about first generation Zoom or like?
Yes. Wait, so the TV show they had this language. It was called Ubba Dubba Wubba language.
Yes, I vaguely remember that.
Right?
Yeah,
and they used to try to like talk to each other and be like Ubba Dubba Wubba Dubba 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 Wubba Dubba Dubba, right? Yo, we tried for forever to learn Ubba Dubba Wubba language. We could not get it.
Oh my God.
So we had a deaf family that went to our church, and we had an interpreter, obviously, there for the deaf family. And one day we just realized that after the pastor said something, the interpreter was a couple seconds behind him. So it was like watching sign language with an answer key, like with a verbal answer key. So if the pastor said Jesus, then we look over at the interpreter and they do something with their hands and we look at each other and we're like, that means Jesus. And we literally did that for months. And we did that for months, and so my mom finally signed us up for like a community class at the library. It was like ABCs 1, 2, 3s, and we learned that stuff. Graduated, it was like 6 weeks, and then we wanted to do more. Wanted to be able to again talk about our mom in sign language. She made us mad. We couldn't talk back in our house, man. So we had to figure out how to do it. So we got pretty conversational, pretty good, and we were able to talk about our mom when she made us mad, and she decided to pay us back. She dropped us off at Def Camp when I was 13. Yeah, so we went in knowing ABCs 1, 2, 3s my name is, and we came out pretty fluent. And that's how I got there. Yeah.
I feel like I have a million questions from that story just alone, but But tell me more about taking ASL into like a social media platform with TikTok and other social media outlets.
Yeah, like I said, free time is a hell of a drug, man. Quarantine. So honestly, TikTok originally for me, or just social media in general, it started out as a way to keep my skills sharp during quarantine.
Nice.
As you can imagine, since I'm a freelance interpreter, I interpreted in places like the hospital, schools, colleges, right? Anywhere a deaf person may be, I might be there as well. And with all of those things being shut down, unless absolutely necessary, interpreting as a profession is heavily affected. And just like any other language, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's why when you take Spanish in high school, 2 years later, you're like, all I remember is hola, right? We don't live in a Spanish-speaking country, and unless you're around Spanish speakers, right, you're gonna lose that information if you don't actively exercise that muscle. So TikTok originally was just a way for me to have some fun during my free time, but also stay productive, keep my skills sharp. That way, when I do go back out into the world and interpret, which I have been a lot more thanks to TikTok, when I go back out into the world and I do interpret, I'm still exercising and training that muscle on a consistent and regular basis. So that's really what social media was for me. And then once I figured out you could leverage social media for different things like the Black Lives Matter movement that recently came up and, became kind of popular or sensationalized, I should say, on social media here in recent times. Then I have the ability to use that platform as people, or as it gains interest, or if people, are expressing interest in what I'm doing, then it turned into, oh, wow, I have an audience. I have people who actually want to hear what I have to say. So let me figure out how to do something with that. And that way, that's what kept me going on TikTok and then eventually Instagram and other social media platforms.
I'm in Massachusetts right now, and you said you were in Texas. So I know we have different quarantine experiences.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But that was so interesting. Basically, I lost my job in end of March due to quarantine. So I kind of started, I'm in a music group, of course, as you know. And so we kind of we had that period between quarantining and George Floyd to kind of just do whatever we wanted with our artistry. And then George Floyd, when the word you used was sensationalized, when that happened, we were able to kind of translate our artistry into
Right.
something, more reflective of that. How did that work for you?
I think for me, the first thing, number one, I'm African American myself. So for me, number one, it had to be a moment of like pause. So I actually took when all of that kind of broke out on social media for myself, I had to take a moment for myself. I have a son, I have a 5-year-old son who's obviously African American as well. So when all of that kind of took place, it's like I'm not even really hurting for me as much as I am for my son, who right now is really cute. But at some point in time, people are going to stop seeing him as cute and as an African-American male in America, right? So, and with all the implications that implies through whatever filter, you know what I mean, you or anyone else puts on that. But I will say it made me more intentional about the content that I was choosing to interpret. It definitely made me more intentional about being unapologetically proud to be Black and also being a representation of Black excellence and success in my field. So when I make those videos and I post them, I always like critique myself so hard to make sure that like it's the most perfect, exceptional interpretation. Nobody can ever say anything's wrong with it. Nobody can come back and, right? Like I want it to be a reflection of of somebody who is African American, who's living that experience, but is a representation of it's not all bad, because being African American is not a bad experience, as social media would have you believe. Something else that was really interesting though, as it relates to that, right after everything happened with George Floyd and it got posted on social media, the LA Times reached out to me, the newspaper reached out to me, and they wanted to interview me about being an African American interpreter. The interpreting profession is predominantly women and white. So being an African American is not normal, right, in interpreting, and then being being an African American male in interpreting isn't normal. So they wanted to ask me questions and things like that. It was really interesting to me because they were interested in my perspective, not because I was a really good interpreter, but because I was an African American interpreter.
Right.
That was really good, right? Like it was through the prism of, we care about what you have to say because right now being African American is a hot ticket item. So let's talk to you. And what was really interesting in the interview is the questions that she was asking me. It kind of put a light on me, you know what I mean? And the whole interview, I was like deflecting. I was like, yeah, have you seen this deaf creator on TikTok? Like, there's a Black deaf guy on. You could totally talk to him, right? Because she started to ask me about the deaf experience, being Black and the deaf experience. And I'm like, to be quite honest with you, I don't know, because I'm not deaf, so I can't really speak to. You know what I mean?
Well, that's just bad research on their part,
right? So like, but I definitely also think that it gave me pause and intention about making sure that people understand that I'm a representation of African American culture in general, but I try not to speak for other people who have, right, intersectionality is a real thing. So people may experience being African American different than myself. So it also gave me the moment to be intentional about highlighting other Black creators as well, who may be experiencing that in a different way as well. So that was a positive that came from all of that.
So the music I play is called chiptune. It's a huge community, actually. Like, it's a national community. Part of what this podcast kind of explores is that chiptune kind of became a white male dominated genre, which there's no reason why it should be like that. Anyway, so one of the issues that we were talking about was tokenism in the chiptune community, which kind of reminded me of what you were just saying, tokenism within the ASL community. Yeah,
exactly. It's interesting. I didn't know much about chiptune until we interacted. And then I went down, well, first I found your music, and then I went down the rabbit hole of your Spotify channel. And then I had to go down the rabbit hole of somebody else's Spotify, right? Like, that is like rabbit holing into like this whole experience in this world, right? I legitimately, I've heard something that has a similar sound, but never knew a name for it, or that it was, you know, an actual budding, growing, legitimate genre, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's super cool to me, number one. But yeah, no, I could imagine, like you said, tokenism, but that's not just in your scene. I think that happens in, like you said, in ASL. I went to a predominantly white institution. I went to Texas Tech University, right? There are way more people on campus that don't look like me than do, right? And it can be easy to fall into a clique and then wind up being the quote unquote token Black guy, you know what I mean? So I definitely could see how tokenism could play a part as it relates to being in the ASL community. I posted a video. There's a girl who's
Oh
getting
my
her college.
God. Yeah.
Did you see that one?
Oh my God. Part of
There's
your videos why I'm addicted to them is because like you crack me up. You are so funny. But yeah.
the girl on the right. I've never met her, by the way. I have no clue who she is. But she posted that video of her finding out that she was getting into college.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like her mom and her dad or whatever, and they're like going crazy, like hooping and hollering. And I posted that that side by side that was like, I'm your interpreter, because it's so right, because it's so rare. It's so rare that they actually see, right, a black male interpreter in their assignments or whatever. They're just like, I cannot believe you exist, right? They call it the unicorn of our profession. But
oh my God.
But with that being said, even when we're calling out that tokenism that does exist, right, in those different spaces, one of the challenges that I've started to see is we can call out tokenism, but then we don't necessarily create either opportunities or spaces for those quote unquote tokens to either connect and or offer the ability for other people within their marginalized communities to access that genre in the same way. So for example, like you said, the minority voices were getting silenced in chiptunes. That would be an example of that, right? Or on my team, there's one other Black interpreter on my team. We need a second sometimes. You know what I mean? Like we no, seriously, like we need a second. And sometimes like we talk about things, and if I'm, for example, when we first started the interview, I said 5 on that man. If I said that to him, he would get it. He will understand, you know what I mean? He will understand it. He will understand it. And it's one of those things where it's like, but if we do that, then it's like, oh, well, y'all are self-segregating, or you're being standoffish, or you're excluding yourself from whatever the case may be. So it's interesting to me that we can call out the tokenism, but then we also don't at the same rate create spaces for people to breathe.
Yes.
Knowing that is a thing. You know what I mean? It's interesting. In your world, now I'm about to start interviewing you, right? I'm about to start I'm like, so, but it's interesting because it does seem like it correlates. So like in your world, do you all have the same, like, are there places or spaces that allow for a lot of diversity in your genre of music? Or
well, that's an interesting question. And one of the things that this podcast landed on was the chiptune community pretended or gave off a false what's it called, like when you are presenting yourself, like a false presentation that it was LGBTQ friendly, that we accept this and that and blah blah blah. But when practice became real, then that like it did not say that.
Gotcha. A facade, that's the word.
Yes. Yeah.
Facade. Yeah, no, I can see that. Y'all are like the brochure for college that has that one Asian person that one Black person on the brochure.
Oh, I know. Oh my, yeah. No, this community is a mess right now. But that's another thing that this podcast tries to like cover, because like it is funny. It's not funny. It's just like weird combining these adult realities to this like kids toy stuff. But what I'm trying to like do is like universalize it. Like what's going on in the community is like, where does that take place everywhere? I guess that's one of my goals. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's dope.
have boundaries for yourself when interpreting? Like, would you never interpret something?
The only boundaries that I have in terms of interpreting are the ones that are enforced on me by like the certifying board of interpreters, meaning that you have to have a certain certification to interpret certain things. So with the certifications and credentials that I currently possess, I don't hold, for example, a court certification. So if somebody was going to be in a court of law, I would not be there with you interpreting it.
I see. Okay, yeah.
Right? Like there are people who have a specific credential for that. Just like, but I do have an education credential, right? So like you may find me in a college classroom, but I have a credential for that. So those boundaries get enforced. The only thing outside of that would be something that is, I don't think I'm a good fit for. So like you wouldn't find me interpreting like a KKK rally, right? Like
Oh, okay, yeah.
I would like readily not volunteer for that. Not volunteer for that. Right. So other than that, no, I'm pretty flexible in terms of like my limits to interpreting. And it also even goes so far as I have a pet peeve when people censor their interpretation. If I were interpreting and you used a curse word, right? So interpreting is a two-way street. So there's expressive and receptive. So receptive is if somebody is doing sign language and I'm speaking English on their behalf. And expressive, right? So the opposite, right? And expressive is what you see me do on TikTok, right? You hear the sound and then you see me express it in sign language, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it can be reversed as well. So let's say, for example, I was with a deaf person and they were having a conversation, let's say to a teacher. It was a deaf student and a hearing teacher. And the deaf student start going off on the teacher, just like hearing kids go off on teachers. And they start just using curse words in the middle of fourth period. As the interpreter, I am going to cuss that teacher out in the middle of fourth period. I am not cussing you out. The student is cursing you out. But, right. But sometimes interpreters will bleep out, right, the explicit language, right? They'll substitute it for something else. So instead of saying the B word, right, they may actually say the B word, like literally the B word, right?
Yeah.
Versus just saying,
oh, okay. Literally the B. Okay.
Literally saying he's calling you the B word versus just saying versus just not breaking stride and just saying, yeah, bitch, da 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 da, right? Like because again, it's not me saying that, I'm interpreting, right? They call it rendering the message faithfully. I always, as an interpreter, want to render the message faithfully, so I don't censor interpretation. Now, that being said, it's interesting to see when somebody's interpreting rap music, if they're ever going to interpret the N-word or not. I'm always looking to see whether they're going to like leave out their racial slur or if they're going to put it in. But obviously there are some like cultural things that surround whether or not you're going to actually do that. One, are you black? Are you black adjacent? Like, are you biracial? Or are you not identifying as African American at all? And then that's a whole other conversation. So, but for me, to answer your question more directly, the only limits that I have are, like I said, the ones that are placed on me either by the interpreting certifying board, or if I just feel like I wouldn't be a good fit.
Have you ever, like the KKK was a good example. Like, have you ever had to interpret hate like that?
Oh yeah, interpret something that I totally disagree with.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I have to. You learn coping mechanisms. Mine is a deep breath, so I don't cringe, like legitimately cringe on my face
right.
while I'm interpreting. This happened to me recently. Actually, I went to a conference where it was a group of psychologists of all people, and they were in a room and they all belonged to like this cohort of like professional development or whatever. And they had a number of guest speakers for the day. Beyonce's dad, Matthew Knowles, happened to be one of them.
Whoa!
And who was great. And so he gave this presentation or whatever the case may be. And once his presentation was over, Les Brown spoke and some other people or whatever. So they started having like this dialogue in the room. The presenters had left and they're having this dialogue in the room. And one of the guys who himself was a guy of Latin descent. I'm not really sure if he was Mexican or Dominican or what, but no, it was of Latin descent. And so he stands up and he's like, I taught my children not to see color. And I immediately took
okay. Yeah.
Right? Because what? Are you like, huh? What are you saying? For real? Like, but he really believes that that's the right thing. You know what I mean? That's the right. He's making a statement that's true about him and his life and how he believes, whatever the case may be. And kid you not, after he sat down, another person who was white stood up and literally was like, I totally agree. I'm going to he said. And I teach my kids not to see color. And They go on this whole, and there's one black person in the room, and other than myself, one black psychologist in the room.
Oh no.
And they go on this whole tangent about, how they don't see color and everybody in the room is agreeing or whatever. And I have to interpret that because, again, it's not my job to interject my opinion at that moment. I am not a part of that cohort. I am simply facilitating communication. So my opinions at that moment don't matter. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I just have to filter that information through, put it through the interpreting process, and then deal with my own personal feelings about it later.
Oh my God. Oh man. That yeah, my mom is like mad old. She's like 70 or 80. So sometimes she's got like the right idea, but obviously some of my age would cringe at I don't see color. But
Right.
yeah, so when she says that, I like cringe and don't say anything. But
some
but
of it though, some of it is just generational gap. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And because my grandmother's mother was a slave, right? Like
Oh my God.
we're not extremely far removed from
Right.
you know what I mean. So that she wasn't for all of her life, obviously, but the point is, right, generation, like they grew up in a different time with a different reality and a different context. So I try to give some people some grace in those things, like if it's an age gap between the two of us, because they
Right.
legitimately just their reality is just a bit different than mine, you know what I mean, just at its baseline. So I try to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, man, like some things are really cringeworthy. That statement being one of them.
The anecdote about your grandmother, that reminded me of like this thing I saw on Twitter. It was like, can we please stop doing like showing all these black and white pictures of MLK and anything civil rights because it makes it feel like it was so far away, and it really wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
My grandmother was born in 1936. So imagine when her mother was born. Right. So yeah, like it's really not. And I knew my great grandmother, like have sat at the dinner table with my great grandmother. So
Whoa.
Again, like you're talking about a generation that was a slave versus somebody who only learns about it in school.
Right.
Right. And we sat at the dinner table together. Like it's not that far removed.
I guess going back to interpreting something that maybe you don't agree with, do you ever have to like, just let me know if this is like a flat no, but like, do you ever have to separate does anyone think that you are taking on that meaning yourself? Has there ever been a situation where it was like, why did you say something like that? Or
For sure.
really?
I think there's a misconception. We have this thing that we do when I think it happens more than you think. But when I think that is happening, we have this thing that we do, and the camera will be able to see me, but I'll like verbalize it as well. I point to myself, like I put my index finger on my chest, like pointing to me. And then I use my other hand to point to the other person.
Oh, so it's like he says.
Well, it's him signing and me speaking, but just so you know, the communication is just coming through me. It's not me though. Yeah, so like I may have to give like that visual cue of being like, I'm the person speaking, but this is the person that you're actually talking to over here, not me. One thing people don't know, and it happens far more often than it should. When in an interpreting situation, you should never say, "Can you tell him?" or "Can you tell her?" Right? Like if I were at a doctor's office and I had a deaf client and a hearing doctor, and the doctor said, could you tell them to?
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Could you tell her to, like a pronoun, as if that person isn't legitimately standing in the room with you, right? It's extremely rude and dismissive. So, right. So things like that, people will put me in a position that I don't want to be in, which is you're not communicating with me, right? You're not talking to Dion as a person. You're talking to Dion as an interpreter, and I'm legitimately like my first priority is just to facilitate your communication, but I'm not a part of your communication.
That's like a whole new that's a whole new wall of like communication. I don't know. Maybe it's not. I don't know.
It is, but and to be honest with you, it's tiring, man. It's tiring.
I bet.
At the end of the day, a legitimate 8-hour day. Do you know how much information has passed through my head, right? And imagine, like, let's say Thursday. What's today? Tuesday? Yeah, Thursday. Let's say this upcoming Thursday. In the morning, I am going to interpret a meeting, like a board meeting for a school district. And then I am going to interpret a bank meeting, like somebody's going to the bank. I have no clue what they're going for. And then I'm going to interpret BRS, which is like how deaf people use the phone. So think about like a deaf person at home calling AT&T, and I'm going to interpret at the hospital. That'll be my 8-9 hours of work on Thursday, but it would be legitimately all of those different subjects, all of those different settings, all of those different people, all of those different places. It's one of the things I love about interpreting, but at the same time, it gets tiring because you have
I
to.
bet. Yeah.
Yeah, like I kid you not, in every single one of those situations, somebody will say, "Can you tell him?" And I'm gonna have to, right, like, and I'm gonna have to say, "Oh, you can just speak directly to them." Like, I'll say that at least 6 times on Thursday.
Now thinking about the way you like explain your experience, like I find such peace in like being able to just like tune people out and like, or like if I don't like where our conversation is going, I'll just be like, oh, I'm gonna go to the bathroom and just like,
yeah, I'll be back.
You don't have the opportunity to do anything like that.
No, unfortunately I don't. I'm often a part of conversations that I do not care to be a part of. I interpreted phone sex the other day.
No, stop. Come on. I was just about to get another time.
I kid you not.
What happened? Oh my God.
I was at BRS, which is, like I said, how deaf people use the phone. So think about like if you were on a Zoom or Skype call, like you could see that person, and that would be me and the deaf person, and then I would have a headset on, and then imagine another person with their phone up to their ear, right? So I'm on the phone with the person with the phone up to their ear, but I'm looking at a deaf person on my computer screen, and they do sign language, and I speak English, and then the person in my ear speaks English, and I do sign language to the person on the screen. Right? Yeah. So you just again facilitate communication. That's literally my job. I kid you not.
And you don't have the opportunity, because if you like lose it, like if you crack up or anything, that will upset the situation.
Some things you just can't help, man. Like I'm human. So like some situations, like I can't help it. But in most things, especially when you've been interpreting for a while, you've come across a lot, you've seen a lot, and not a whole lot surprises you like it did when you first like started out.
Oh, okay, so, yeah.
I don't break stride as often as you may think, but I definitely sometimes like I legitimately can't help it. Even as long as I've been at it. But yeah, I was on the phone, and the weird part about all of this is the person that I was signing to on the screen was the woman, and the person that I was talking to over the phone was the man. So as the woman is signing, like when I get home, I'm gonna do A, B, C, and D. I'm on the phone with a man telling him, yeah, when I get home, I'm gonna do A, B, C, and D. And it's not me. It's not me, it's her that's gonna do it to him. But oh my God. I'm the one interpreting the conversation. Yeah, I mean, it was like, I'm just gonna, grab you by the throat, and I'm a.
Oh, stop.
Yeah, like it
I already can't. I'm already done. I can't even.
I kid you not. I kid you not. And you just have to go with it. You have to get in there and you're interpreting, you're facilitating a communication, and it could literally be when you answer that phone and you get that call, it could literally be about anything. So.
Oh my God! Was every party comfortable with what was going on?
I know that the deaf person probably was. Once I think I'm gonna say think because it's not my experience, but from what I've experienced, deaf people get extremely comfortable using interpreters, especially if they've been deaf all of their life, because it's just a way of life. You know? What I mean?
Yeah.
Like the whole mask situation, right? Like you have to wear a mask literally everywhere you go. And people are like completely in protest of it, but like you can't tell me what to do. But they wear their seatbelt because we've been wearing our seatbelt for forever, right? So it's just normal, yeah. So I think it's the same thing for the deaf people. It's just like, I've been using the interpreter forever. You're just another interpreter, no big deal. I think for the man on the phone, if he's been involved with the deaf community or deaf people and has used an interpreter for a long time himself, then he probably was completely fine with it as well. But if he's new to that experience, then I'd imagine it was a bit awkward to hear somebody with as much bass as I have telling him that they were going to grab him by the throat when they got home.
What do you know about like communication? What are some things you know about communication that other people might not?
I mean, without getting extremely technical, like talking about AAVE or code switching or changing register or translation versus interpretation, like those technical things, sure. But I think in my experience as an interpreter, I think one thing that a lot of us hearing people that we take for granted is just the beauty and value in explicit communication. We hear a lot of times people have this the phrase "say what you mean and mean what you say." You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Or just like, or be clear about what it is you mean and things like that. And communication in and of itself is this really complex thing that we decode so seamlessly. It's almost like, have you ever gotten in your car and been driving and then you kind of space out and then the next thing you know, you're there and you're like,
Yeah.
I wasn't actively driving, but I know I was driving, but I've done it so many times that it just kind of is a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Autopilot is
I
what I
don't.
call it.
That's
Yeah.
a great way to describe autopilot, right? Even now, as me and you are having this conversation, we're both taking in each other's information, putting it through a filter through our own experiences. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
digesting that information and then responding in a way that creates dialogue. But it's happening so seamlessly that it doesn't seem like a lot of effort, but it is. And I think the more ambiguous a person is, the harder it is for anyone to connect or relate to that person. And I say that from somebody who does communication all day long. The people that I hate to interpret for are the ones who are ambiguous, the people who leave a lot up to question, the people who use the word if a lot. Everything has a condition. If this happens, then that, right? It's these infinite possibilities and these, right, complexities that if you're just resolute and definitive and explicit, right, in your communication, I think everybody would be much better off. Everybody would be much better off in that. And that's in every sense of the word. So like I said, I can talk to you about technical things about communication that people don't know all day long, but I would say that's probably the one that, as an interpreter and somebody who does communication, that's probably the most impactful thing that I've learned for sure.
Do you find vagueness to be bad?
Right. There's a difference between being vague and abstract. Right.
Right.
There are abstract ideas that I can communicate clearly about. But no matter how clearly I communicate about an abstract idea, it's still going to be abstract. In this case, abstract being complex. If I were to talk to you about something that was complex, I could talk to you about it as clearly as I wanted to, but at the end of our conversation, that subject matter would still be complex. If I talk to you about something that is not complex, if I talk to you about a simple subject matter, but I didn't do it in a very explicit way, or clear communication, that's what I mean by ambiguous.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, is leaving things up to interpretation that don't need to be left up to interpretation.
We should define code, like AVE and code switching, but I wanted to know, like, do you have biases on these elements that go into communication, or do you view these things neutrally?
I don't think any one person can be unbiased about anything, if I'm being completely honest.
Right.
Right, no person is truly impartial about a whole lot.
Right.
Everybody has a set of experiences and a filter, and right, you have to process information as you receive it through your personality, who you are, your experiences, your filter, etc. You know what I mean? As far as AAVE and those things go, I don't have a bias towards the validity of them, if that's what you mean. Or if do you mean like if I have a preference, like do I have a preference of one or the other, or do I support it or not support it because I'm biased? Is that what you mean?
I don't know if I necessarily mean that, but I mean, like, do you view like code switching, if we were to like specify it,
Right.
code switching, like you brought up in one of your videos, you differentiated between code switching and another word, which I can't remember right now.
Oh, register, change and register.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm the way I'm presenting this to you right now, I'm trying to be neutral. So
Gotcha.
uh,
Got it.
so it seemed like when you were talking about code switching, you had like negative annotation about it, and it seemed like you gave registering positive annotation. So yeah, I was wondering if you had, for code switching, let's say, did you have biases on code switching?
I don't personally. I code switch every day. So I don't have any negative feelings towards code switching. I take that back. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I take it back. right? I take it back because I think that it sucks that people have to code switch, right? The need to code switch is often about assimilation and acceptance, right? Because code switching at its core, right, means that I'm making a change based on culture. So in order to readily be accepted or assimilate into a particular culture, depending on where I am, me trying to assimilate or match or blend in or right or whatever to be accepted by those people in that setting, I'm doing it based on culture. But what does that say about me being from a different culture than you? And the only way I can be readily accepted into your environment is if I leave my culture behind.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
Does that make
Okay.
sense? Right.
Yes.
So for example, the example that I used in the video was when people change how they speak with their friends versus when they go to work, right? Age-old example of code switching. The thing is, if I were to go to corporate America, and I spoke in AAVE exclusively, right? African American Vernacular English. If I spoke in AAVE exclusively, I'd get fired.
Right.
Quickly. Especially if it had anything to do with sending an email or having a conversation, hosting a meeting, or being a part of one, right? I'd quickly be put in the mailroom where I didn't have to talk, right? But why? Is it that AAVE isn't accepted in your culture? And then what does that say about your culture that it doesn't accept somebody else's? That's that's the negative vibe that you pick up in terms of code switching.
Right.
Now I don't think it's negative that people code switch. Again, I think it's to a large extent useful. One of the reasons I'm able to go to all of those interpreting spaces is because I have the ability to code switch. There's another component of sign language too, is cultural mediation, right? Deaf people have a culture as well, and I mediate that culture when I'm interpreting. It's that same thing, but hearing people, we don't have a cultural mediator, right? We expect everyone to identify as this baseline culture, and that's just not reality. So that would be, I guess, the negative feeling I would have towards code switching. But I don't think that is negative or bad that people do code switch. In terms of register, I think that's something that has not been assigned to any particular race, sexual orientation, religion, etc. Like anybody is welcome to change their register. Any and everybody's welcome. Register accepts everybody. You don't have to have, right? You don't need a black card to be accepted at Club Register. You don't, right? Like everybody is invited to the party when we talk about register, right? Because it's something that we all do to
right.
whatever varying degree that you change your register in your communication, you do it. And we all do it. And nobody views it negatively, right? Nobody views it negatively. So register is a lot less impartial in terms of who's able to do it and if it's viewed as negative or not, right? There's not really any negative connotation or denotation to changing your register. While code switching, it may be. I've heard people say, you're in America now, speak English, right? To Spanish-speaking people. But what does that say about people in America? So if somebody speaks Spanish, they're not accepted in America because they don't speak English? Because that communication barrier is an inconvenience to you.
Right.
The entitlement, you know what I mean? Like, so that's where a lot of the negative feeling of code switching, in my opinion, can come into play. So
so let me present you with like a scenario. So if I started this interview and I was exclusively using my knowledge of like AAVE, whatever word choice I was using, and let's say I was code switching because I was talking to you, how would you view me? And would you view not necessarily me or like the bigger picture, like how you were describing? How would you handle that, I guess?
That it reminds me of when I get into Uber and they change the music to rap music.
Okay.
Right? Like, I'm not sure if that happens to you. I'm sure it happens to other people. Maybe not rap music, but maybe they change it to country when you get in their car. Or maybe they change
that never happens to me. But
oh, well, see,
that's the experience.
Experience, right? When I get into a car, when I get into an Uber, if I call it Uber, right, and it's happened on more than one occasion, I'll get into an Uber and they may be listening to talk radio, and then they'll switch the music to rap.
That's really bad,
right? And what about now? Don't get me wrong, I love rap music, like,
yeah,
and I'll probably start rapping, to be quite honest. but as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I'm also a competitive dancer. I listen to a lot of music.
Right.
I have an appreciation for it. I play 3 instruments. I was in the band for 6 years, right? Like, I love music. So I'm not limited to rap, but you just put me in a box. Why?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it'd be one thing if we were having this conversation and we were code switching because of familiarity. You code switching and using AAVE makes the assumption that that's my culture.
Right.
Remember, code switching is about culture, right? So you using AAVE on this call is you assuming my culture is inclusive of AAVE, and you don't know that.
Right.
Right. But then if you did that, you'd be making that assumption based on what? In this case, most likely my skin color. Well, that's what we call prejudice.
Right.
Right. Right. So don't do that. Right. Exactly. Now, if me and you are familiars and we've had a few conversations, for example, we've communicated via text or otherwise, right, prior to us having this conversation. If I were to exclusively use AAVE to you in those text conversations, and then you got onto this particular interaction and you code switched, I wouldn't be offended.
Oh, okay. I see.
I've displayed to you that my culture is inclusive of AAVE. So at that point, why not?
Right.
Right. But that also brings us back to the notion or the idea that there is a baseline for what culture is readily accepted in communication.
Okay, so here, let me just switch it on you. So let's start over with the conversation. So let's say we start over and then you come at me and you come at me mad white, like just like extra
Oh
extra
my
white.
God, dude.
Yeah, there you go. You got
Oh
Hey,
my
you're
God.
speaking my language right now.
Right. Yo, bro, I'm telling you, so totally cool.
How how should I respond, do you think?
I mean, yeah, you have one or two ways, right? I have one or two ways in every interaction, right? The answer could be yes or no, right? There's a quote, right? God offers to every mind truth and repose. Take which one you will, but you can never have both, right? So if I were to come to that interaction and I did that to you, to be quite honest with you, that would be prejudice, right? And contrary to popular belief, Black people can't be prejudiced. They can't be racist by definition, but they can be prejudiced. So if I were to do that to you, I've assumed that stereotypical vocal fry, slur, lag, right? The cadence of my voice, I've changed those things to assume what your culture is, right? That your culture isn't the norm. And I just did air quotes, but the norm, right? I've assumed that your culture isn't the norm, but why? What am I basing that on? Because you live in Massachusetts and you're white, right? Like it's not my place to readily assume that about you. So then, like you said, what would I expect your response to be? Well, I would expect you, you could either correct me and like confront that situation, depending on how comfortable you are with confrontation, right? Or you could change my communication by example.
Right. Okay.
Right. If you in that first scenario got on the call and you started using AAVE with me, I probably would have changed my register, right? To combat the idea that you needed to do that for me. I would have, instead of getting on and saying, yeah, man, I just cracked open a beer. I'm ready when you're ready. Like, let's go, right? Very informal, very casual. Instead, I may have said something like, I'm completely prepared. And when you're ready to proceed, just inform me of that. Right?
Yeah.
Like I would have, right? Like I can change my register, say the exact same thing, but take my register up, right? And that in and of itself, the way that I presented that communication may give you the impetus to stop using AAVE and come meet me at a different level, because, right, that may be another way to change how somebody's communicating. And you could do the same thing with me, right? If I did that vocal fry thing, you could be very clear in your diction, which may give me the indication that the vocal fry is unnecessary.
So do we use register to kind of create an introductory neutral?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Your register really sets the tone of what type of conversation you're ready to have.
I guess, like, if we're really analyzing communication, like, when do you break the mold of registered neutrality to, I don't know, move into AAVE or move into informal communication? When do you like break that?
That would depend on your setting, right?
Right.
Your register, changing in your register is dependent upon your environment, right? And who's in that environment with you. And again, it sets the tone for what type of conversation you're getting ready to have. If you start a conversation with a very clear thesis, I'm almost expecting you to just finish your thought completely. I'm going to just listen. I may ask a question every now and then, but there's not going to be a lot of turn taking in that interaction versus when we got on here, you said, hey, Dion, what's going on? You immediately started with an open-ended question.
Right.
Right. So you've already set our register as informal. You've already set the expectation of question and answer or call and response or turn taking. So you chose that register based on the first thing you said without knowing it, right? Without
Yeah.
intentionally doing it, but that's exactly what you did. You set the tone of our conversation by choosing the informal register.
Kind of where I'm going with this is a couple weeks ago we had a person named Momo Pixels on, and I try and connect every episode, kind
Right.
of. So Momo Pixel is she's everything, but she's a game creator.
I love that.
And she created this game called Hair which is like, in the game you are a black woman and you're just trying to get to point A and point B, and all these white hands start gumming for your hair because they're like, oh, I want to touch it, and you just like swap away the hands. That's the game.
That is great.
That doesn't really have anything to do with the question. I just wanted to advertise that game because it's awesome. But so she is amazing, and she dresses however she wants wherever she goes, and sometimes that breaks the mold. And so one of the things we were talking about with communication with her is like, people will want to say that she looks amazing. And so somebody will be like, oh my God, you look amazing, da da da. And she says, okay, that's okay, kind of. But then when somebody's like, oh my God, how did you get your hair like that? How did you do this? Da da da. She's like, are you asking me that because you want me to explain to you how I got my hair in this way? Or right. Yeah. So she recommends like people really looking at what it is that they are saying when they are saying that. So do you ever have to like kind of analyze, how do I phrase this question?
I think I know where you're going though.
Okay. Help me out here, Dion.
Yeah, no, for sure. And honestly, it takes me back to the statement that I made earlier about leaving things that don't need to be left up to interpretation.
Okay, yes.
Right? It's that same statement, right? How did you get your hair like that? Well, what is it that you're asking when you say, like, what do you actually mean? And this is what I mean by ambiguous communication. Like, people would just be explicit and it would everybody would benefit, right? Could you explain to me how your hair is able to do that?
Right. Okay.
Right? That says to me, I honestly don't know. I'm uneducated, or I haven't educated myself on how your type of hair is able to do that particular thing. Explain it to me, please.
Right.
Versus, how did you get your hair like that? Well, do you want me to explain? Or was that a shot? Like, was that a dig? Or
right?
You see what I'm saying? Like, it could be. It doesn't have to be left up to interpretation. And I feel like oftentimes we do that unintentionally or otherwise, and it's just unnecessary. It really is. That's like me saying, "Wow, you all are having casserole."
Oh, I don't know.
Like, am I happy about the casserole?
Oh, okay, I see.
Right, like, if I
okay, I got you. Okay, yes.
And I'm being a little facetious when I say casserole, because casserole is like attributed to white people. So if I
didn't even recognize that. Okay, I see. Okay. So, like, I'm being insulted right now.
You totally are, right? You're not gonna find a lot of green bean casseroles at a black Thanksgiving at the barbecue.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? So like, if I'm like, oh my God, y'all are, oh, okay, you're having casserole. Am I happy about the casserole, or am I
right?
You know what I mean? Versus saying, oh, casserole is delicious, may I have some?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Or me saying, I'm not a big fan of casserole, I think I'm gonna pass.
Right.
Literally, I don't need to leave it up to interpretation, but me making the statement, oh, you got casserole, right? Like it, how do I really feel about that, right? It's the same in my mind. It's the same. It's left up to interpretation, and it's just unnecessary. So I agree with her. Say what you mean, and mean mean what
Yeah.
you say, right? If you really want to know something about my hair, number one, educate yourself, especially if I don't know you, right?
Right.
Because it's not my responsibility, not my social responsibility anyway, to educate you on African American hair.
Yeah.
That's number one, right? Like that is your, if you want to know about it, then you should get a quick Google search will do you just fine. Right.
That's what she
So like,
said. She said, "Oh no, no, no. Okay, yeah." So we had a trans person on last week, and we were talking about like how do you talk to a trans person, and he said,
yeah.
"Google it first. Google's there. Like Google." Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right. Because again, it's this idea of normal.
right,
The idea of normal. And when we say something is normal, especially when you're talking about somebody like who's African American in their hair, or a trans person who was on with you last week, or a person who uses AAVE or vocal fry, or whatever the case may be, right? When we say normal, it looks, sounds, feels a very certain way, and all of us as Americans, I'm using air quotes again, subscribe to the same sense of normal,
right,
right? So anything that's outside of normal has to then be defined as an abnormality. You can only be normal or abnormal. There's literally no in between. So if something is normal, normally that means white, male, heterosexual, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Like that's normal in America. So anything outside of that is an abnormality. So as always, right, being abnormal can either be something that people view as a very negative thing, or being abnormal can be viewed as a very special thing. And when you are when you're speaking about abnormalities, and when you're talking about abnormalities, it typically makes people uncomfortable because it's not normal.
right.
Right? Things that are not normal make us uncomfortable. There is taboo. So it's one of those things where it's like it becomes even more vitally important to be explicit with your language when you're talking about abnormalities, when you're communicating thoughts, principles about abnormalities, and more importantly, I wouldn't put the burden of educating you about the abnormality on the abnormal person, on the abnormal
I see. Yeah.
person.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
like I would educate myself about the abnormality, and then I would go from there if I wanted to seek more information or whatever the case may be. But I definitely just wouldn't come into a conversation and it's your responsibility. You should explain to me what it's like to be white and live in Massachusetts. That's your responsibility because I don't know. Right? That's totally not your responsibility.
Right.
You know, so and that works in reverse too. It's not my responsibility to explain to whoever how my hair does this.
Right.
You know.
Okay. So AVE was kind of I mean, it's always a thing, but it was kind of a hot topic. So I actually, you kind of preluded it. I saw it on your story, and then it was trending on Twitter because an influencer, a white influencer whose name is escaping me, she basically went on a video and she was like, I don't know why people are so upset about me using AAVE, because AAVE is stan culture, which I don't totally understand, but I think it's just like internet speak or like meme speak. So on Twitter, she was getting a lot of responses, negative responses.
Sure.
And there was like a lot of rhetoric about people need to understand what AAVE is. People need to understand where it comes from. There was non-person of color, people should not be using AAVE. So there's just like a menagerie of rhetoric. So I kind of wanted to learn more about how you view AAVE.
So first things first, and I talked about this on one of my stories, there are a lot of different theories about how AAVE came to be. For me, the explanation that I most identify with, or the one that makes the most sense to me, is during the slave trade, right, you have people who don't speak English. And those people are forcibly removed from their homes and then brought here to, at the time, something that doesn't look like America today. But they're brought to America, right, to become slaves. But again, remember, these people don't speak English. They're told that if they try to learn to read or to write English, that they be killed, right? And people who disobeyed that were killed as an example. And one of the easiest ways to oppress people is not give them the ability to speak. Have you ever seen a movie where like the somebody's a prisoner of war and the people who got them captured, they talk in Russian while they're
Yes.
around the other
Yeah.
person? Because that communication barrier literally can immobilize somebody, right? You're not able to communicate, right? You're not able to plan. You're not able to strategize. You're not able to mobilize. You're not able to do any of those things without effective communication, right? So they talk in it, right? They do this thing, this secret, right? Where you don't have access to it. And the longer they were able to keep slaves from being able to have access to the English language, the longer they're able to carry out, right? Benefiting economically and otherwise from free labor. Anyway, that goes to say, so when slaves are learning English, it's by experience, and it's what we call accidental learning. So accidental learning is when you were a kid and your mom was on the phone with your grandma or your aunt or whatever, and she was talking about something, and then you heard the conversation because you were in the next room doing the dishes, and now you know your cousin failed English and they're in trouble. Nobody intended to tell you that your cousin failed English, but you overheard a conversation, right? Even though you didn't hear your grandma's side or whatever, based on what your mother is saying to your grandma, you know that your cousin has failed English, even though it didn't have anything to, that's called accidental learning. So if I don't speak English and I get here and I'm a slave and people are in the fields and people who own slaves, they own horses, cracking whips, etc., they speak English to each other. So what do? I accidentally learn English through accident, right? Through observation. Even though it wasn't intended for me, the communication wasn't intended for me, I'm still going to pick it up, right? But I'm not gonna pick it up formally because it wasn't taught to me. I'm just picking this up through accidental learning, right? So my language model is broken.
So
Hence,
sorry, just a quick
AAVE.
clarification.
No, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so in the context of slavery, so
Right.
how did, if slaves, it was illegal for them to learn English, how did slave owners communicate to slaves to do whatever?
Exactly. English.
Okay. Okay, I got
Right?
it.
Does that make sense? Right. So
Yes.
if I tell you to do something, right? If I tell you to pick cotton, or I tell you to do whatever the case may be, right? If I only know English, then the only way I can communicate to you is in English, right?
Right.
Something other people can do is visual clues, right? We have the benefit of eyesight, right? So I might point at something, right? Has anybody ever told you to bring them a water bottle, but they didn't actually say, bring me the water bottle? They just
Yes.
pointed to the water bottle, then kind of gestured for you to bring it over to them, or the remote control or something like that, right? Like there are other ways to body language, right? There are other ways to help foster that communication. But again, if you don't teach me English, but all I hear is English, then at some point I'm either going to accidentally learn it or intentionally learn it. That's my only option, right?
I guess it's dumb of me to try and analyze slave culture, like make sense
it's not
of
dumb.
it.
No, I don't think it's dumb at all. I think that's the benefit of conversation, right?
True.
Is because somebody else had the same question, I promise. Yeah. So
I guess it just seems dumb to make it illegal, and then but okay,
and then also want me to know what you mean when you say go pick the cotton, right? But right. But so that being said, that's kind of how right, that's how slaves learned it. So anyway, that being said, through accidental learning or whatever the case may be, they picked up this broken form of English, like patois or Creole or whatever the case, right? All of those other languages, right? They pick them up and they have influences from other places, right? And so forth and so on. We originally called it Ebonics, right? They took the word ebony and they took the word phonics and they put it together and they called it Ebonics, right? So now you have labeled this incorrect accidental learning of English as ebony. It was always phonics, right? But now you've added a race to it.
Right.
So when you have the white girl who's on Twitter and who's using AAVE, the reason that she's getting that backlash is because adding a culture to AAVE happened a very, very long time ago. Does that make sense, right?
Yes.
And Black people didn't come up with the word Ebonics. White people did.
Right.
Right? So labeling incorrect grammar ebony came from white people. So not only I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the girl on Twitter. right? So your ancestors labeled incorrect grammar as ebonics or ebony, right, meaning black, and now you're appropriating that same thing now that, right, it's a part of someone else's culture. That's where the backlash comes from. And even as we've grown out of that, as we're talking, we're saying AAVE, but the AA literally stands for African American.
One of my favorite speeches is James Baldwin. His speech title
Mm-hmm.
is "I Am Not Your Negro,"
Yeah,
and I love that speech because basically, like, he's like, "Don't ask me why we have a black problem," and James Baldwin is black, of course.
right,
He's like, "Ask white people. White people made all this up. It's their
right.
concepts. Ebonomics is their concept. You're saying is my concept. White people's concept." Yeah, so that just reminded me of that and adds another
Yeah.
level of this speech from Baldwin that I like.
No, for sure. I love Baldwin.
Oh yeah,
I think we also have to give some grace again in terms of generation because I have not seen that video. I think I've seen it, but I'm not sure we're talking about the same one. But it's a younger girl, and in the video she says you're a product of your surrounding, and if you grew up in this certain hood, then you're gonna speak this certain way. At
right.
least that's the video that I saw, but I'm not sure if that's the same one you're talking about.
Well, I don't know either, but it's definitely like a similar concept.
Along that line, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
So
she's talking about like being a product of her environment and that type of thing, or whatever the case may be. And the reality of it is, right? If you go anywhere where black people are, and I'm gonna say black people who use AAVE. If you go anywhere where black people are that use AAVE, then you have the ability to accidentally learn too. You know what I mean? Like
okay,
if
yeah,
you were right, if me and someone were having a conversation and you happen to be a part of that conversation, you could accidentally learn some of our slang or vernacular or whatever the case may be, right? So I think we have to give some, especially the younger generation, because they didn't grow up in segregation. They didn't grow up in slavery, in white only, colored here, white people here, right? They grew up where having 6 black kids and 8 Mexicans in their class is normal.
right,
And how the black kids communicate with each other is normal. And how, you know
right,
what I mean? And when I say normal, I mean normal in the context of their everyday lives. So to them, using AAVE is normal, right?
right.
Like it's used in their everyday environment. So what makes it wrong for them to use something they literally experience every single day, right? But their reality is they grew up in an environment or in a time where that could readily be used around them, and what would be wrong with them using it too?
Another thing I was kind of like reflecting on this discussion. So a decade ago, in another lifetime, yeah, before Obama was president,
Right.
I'm in the LGBT community, and when
Mm,
I was confronting that before Obama, if
mm,
people remember what that world was like,
right.
I had to confront myself. So I like moved to California,
Okay.
and I didn't really have any supports there, so I was on the streets for a little bit,
Mm,
and people in my community, the LGBT community, would use AAVE, and that's how I would identify who was safe in like my community. And through that, I met people who supported me, and in ways I supported them, and they helped me get off the street
yeah.
and stuff like that. So I used, even though I don't need to now, I used AAVE as a survival tool.
Sure.
So I was just reflecting on that when people were from some of the rhetoric where it was like only this set of people should be using AAVE. And I was
Mm.
thinking, if I did not have that tool, where would I be? So I don't know. I don't really have a question on this one,
That's
but yeah.
that's that for me personally. Right. It goes back to again the early conversation we're having, right? When I don't think it's bad for people to code switch because often it's a means of either assimilation or acceptance, right? You
Yeah.
needed to be accepted by a certain community, you needed to be supported by a certain community, and with that acceptance came you code switching, right? To
Right.
be able to, right, to be accepted into that environment and then supported and looked after and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't what's wrong with code switching in that particular setting, right? But so I personally don't think that is wrong for people to code switch. I don't. I would say just make sure that when you are code switching, you're not doing it for a reason that's motivated by prejudice, like the conversation, part of the conversation we had where you're assuming I'm going to use AAVE because I'm black, right? Or
Right.
you're assuming I'm going to use AAVE because I'm Mexican, or I'm, whatever the case may be, right? I would make that assumption. But if AAVE is a part of your vernacular and something that you speak or something that you use, know how to use effectively, then that you're by all means able to. And I also don't like the notion that this is the thing, man. Language does not belong to anyone,
Right.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
Communicate, right? It doesn't belong to anyone, right? And if we're gonna call AAVE a dialect of a language, it doesn't belong to anyone, right? We say it belongs to African Americans because it's labeled as African American vernacular English, right? But that's you putting a culture to something, but that comes from a long history, which we just discussed previously. But language itself does not belong to any one person. That's like saying the only way you should learn Spanish is if a Spanish person teaches it to you.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. Yeah.
well, I know a whole bunch of black people that can speak Spanish and could teach
Right.
me Spanish too, but they not Spanish. They not Spanish though. You know what I mean? Like, that's like saying the only way you should learn Italian is if you learn it from an Italian person.
Right.
But I know a whole bunch of people who are not Italian that can teach me Italian. You know what I mean? The thing is, it doesn't belong to anyone, AAVE included. So unless somebody is ready to argue me down on languages belonging to a certain group of people, then the argument of AAVE can only be used by African Americans is completely invalid and just ill thought out in general. So yeah, man, like I definitely don't think that it's something that people have to shy away from. I think that if they know it, if they use it, if they're using it for a reason that isn't fueled by prejudice, then by all means.
So let me give you the end of that story. Okay, so I was confronting myself. I was on the streets. These people helped me. Okay. And then, I might have needed to like figure out, me and my mom needed to figure out some stuff. So
Sure.
I called my mom
Uh,
after not speaking to her for a while, and she bought me a plane ticket. She bought me a plane ticket home. Okay.
Right.
And the community members, not, for more reasons. I mean, there was some drama that happened, but basically I threw them away and I was able to go back to my white area where I had a little bit of protection and money, and I was able to throw away AAVE, right?
Sure.
So that makes me wonder, that just made me question myself when like I had the ability, I had the privilege to throw away AAVE.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I don't know if you had a response to that.
No, I mean it's like I said, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's a muscle, and you have to exercise it, right? That was again one of the reasons why I started doing those TikToks and things, was because I want to keep that language fresh. I want to keep it sharp.
Yeah.
And but you code switched.
Right.
You went to an environment that AAVE was readily acceptable, and even gave you a bit of, dare I say, clout, right? It gave you the stamp of approval. Oh, he's good. He can assimilate, right? And then you get all the privileges that come along with assimilation, right? Black people do it every day. That's why we're in corporate America, right? Like, right? I mean, seriously, right? And this is, my mom is going to kill me for this, but my mother is a VP at a Fortune 100 company.
Oh shit.
And when I talk to my mom after work hours, my mom is a Southern Black mother in every sense of the AAVE word. When I call my mom at work, you can barely tell this my mom. I kid you not, because she goes with it. But I guarantee you, my mother would not be a VP at a Fortune 100 company if she went to work every day and used AAVE. Is she wrong for that? Is that a bad thing? Does she not deserve all of the privileges that come along with code switching and not using AAVE in that environment? Is she evil because she chooses not to display her AAVE at work? Is she wrong because she leaves her quote unquote black card in her car? And like, you know what I mean? Like, It's not right. It's a means of assimilation. It's a means of acceptance. If she wants to be taken seriously and accepted and assimilate into a certain culture of corporate America, and she's an African American female, right, in a white male dominated industry, and she's in a position of senior management, then okay, she has to, right, there are
Right.
some things, there's some concessions that you need to make if you want access to the privileges that come along with that, right? And I think for you in that situation, it's the same thing. You went to California, you needed access to some privileges, so you code switch to get it. Right? Like, okay, cool. Right? I mean, and that's okay. As far as throwing it away, I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and say if you don't use it, you lose it. But I guess the better question, right? The better question that I would be asking you is, did you throw it away because you were ashamed of it? Did you throw it away because you thought you wouldn't be accepted if you held on to it? Did you throw it away because you view it as negatively? Or did you throw it away because you simply just don't use it where you are? And if you just don't use it where you are, then you just don't use the language, and that's one thing. Did you assimilate back into that culture and leave AAVE behind because you were
Right.
only, right? You see what I'm saying? Because you view it negatively, like, oh, I only did that because I needed something at the time, and I really ain't, one of them AAVE people. Is it that intention, or is it, well, I was about to say Boston. I don't know if you're in Boston or not, but I'm in Massachusetts, so I just, we don't speak AAVE here. Who would
Right.
I speak to, right? It's not culturally accepted here. So that being said, like, the culture just, right? It's like me coming back to Dallas with that Memphis example and saying, hey, fire off on that. If I came to Massachusetts and said, hey, fire off on that man, y'all would look at me crazy. Like, what is this man talking about, right? And it's not because I'm ashamed of it, but it's because it's just not culturally accepted there.
I guess it was a long time ago, so I
Yeah,
wish I could go back and
exactly.
see, because people are
Yeah,
not the same.
for sure.
But I would like to tell you that it was because I did not, in order to assimilate back home, I didn't need to use it as a tool anymore. But
Sure.
who knows? I mean,
We all, and to be honest, even if was your perspective or that's the reason why back then you're allowed to grow out of that space as well. I'll say that I think anybody can go through a set of experiences that allow them to do certain things. As I was growing up, I was taught to, if I'm walking out of my office building, don't get too close if there's a white lady walking in front of me because I don't want to startle her. Or I was always told to understand the differences between I and me, right, and use them appropriately. That literally in that sense, right, like in that rhyme. I was always taught, things like that. It's learned behavior because I'm trying to get access to a certain thing, world, or whatever the case may be. Am I doing those things because I really feel like they're right? Probably not. But am I doing them as a means of assimilation and acceptance? Probably so. Right. So, I mean, we all have those thought processes that we have to challenge or whatever, whether it be AAVE or language or code switching or changing register. It's a complex thing, but I think everybody's struggling with it in their own way.
do you like think about all this when you are actively communicating?
I would say I think about these things in like personal and professional development. And then wherever I am in that progression kind of just comes out as I'm communicating.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, I got you.
When I'm actively interpreting, I just don't have the bandwidth to support that extra.
Right, that would
Like
be
that,
a lot of
right?
brain
Like
function.
yeah, exactly. You're right. Like I'm already right. They call it noise, right? So like if my phone is in my pocket and it keeps ringing, I'm like, man, like, is my mom okay? Is my son okay? Does
Right,
my family
right.
need, right? So now I have these thoughts at the back of my head, but I'm also actively trying to like switch between two languages simultaneously, right? So it's like I don't have time for that extra thought process in the middle of it. But during like professional and personal development, we hash out these topics all the time, and quite often we get left right where me and you are, where we've talked about it for an hour and we're still only a
Yeah.
fraction of the way through what the conversation could possibly. It's just like it's just such a complex thing that you just you take it in stride. So I think wherever I am in that progression at the time is what comes out as I'm actively like practicing the profession. But I definitely think about these things a lot, which is why they show up on my IG story a lot.
Which people should follow? Where can people find you?
Yep. So on TikTok and Instagram. I am Harrell Moves, HarrellMoves. And then on any other platform, just search my name, Dion Harrell. Business inquiries, DionInterpreting@gmail.com. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'm on everything but YouTube, so probably shouldn't look for me there. But
you should get on. Oh, we didn't even talk about TikTok. Oh man. All right.
TikTok I'm totally a part of. So yeah, TikTok, IG, Facebook, find me any of those platforms for sure.
Some of the rhetoric that was coming out of that Twitter video we were talking about was it's unfair for, in some situations, to be able to view AAVE negatively, like how we were talking about maybe with your mom who's the VP. If she was using AAVE in work, it would be perceived as negative. Yet some TikTok stars, people are basically monopolizing off AAVE, in which it is good. So it's unfair to set that double standard where white people are monopolizing AAVE, where African Americans are not able, or are viewed negatively when using it.
I mean, in that case, intentionality becomes extremely important, right? All right, it's like blackface, all right? Never a good idea.
Right.
Right. So are you on TikTok using AAVE as a way to mock a demographic? Like, are you using AAVE as a way to poke fun at, or are you using it in a way that is derogatory term towards a certain group of individuals? If that's the case, then that's a no-go.
Right.
Right. Now, if you're using AAVE in the sense of comedic relief, if you're using AAVE in the sense of entertainment, then I can make the argument for a lot of things, right? If that's the case, then should I be using ASL for entertainment on TikTok? I'm not deaf.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like,
okay, yeah.
Does that make sense, right? Like,
yes.
But people don't view me as using it negatively. People don't view me as I'm monopolizing deaf people's language, right? Like, am I mocking deaf people? No. Am I doing something that makes information accessible to both hearing and deaf people? Yes. Am I giving voice or audience to a language that they use, which otherwise may not be seen by a larger audience? Possibly. But am I exploiting the language? No. I'm well versed in it. I'm knowledgeable about it. I don't culturally appropriate their culture. I am a language user. So why can't I? I can make the argument about a number of things, but for me, I don't view it that way.
I like one of the things you were saying. You brought up blackface, which I think a lot about minstrelsy, which the MLK thing. Like, you think it's kind of a dead art. It doesn't exist anymore. But I think what deserves a lot of exploration is modern minstrelsy, which is why I was checking myself. And I stopped using, like, I used to use, one of my favorite GIFs is like this black woman fainting.
Okay.
So I would use, and I still love that GIF, but I don't use it anymore because I don't want to participate in modern minstrelsy. So I'm wondering, even though they might not be aware of it, or they might have done accidental or learning, do you think that people who use AAVE comedically kind of participate in conscious or subconscious modern minstrelsy?
It's really, how are you capitalizing off of it, right? Like, and who's your audience, and who's involved in the communication, and why are you, right? Like, it all comes down to intentionality. It all comes down to intentionality. You know what I mean? Like, are you monetarily benefiting from this? Are you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yes, I guess for me, like I said, just it comes down to intentionality. You know what I mean? You stop using the GIF of the black woman fainting, it like exclusively, no matter who you're talking to, when you're talking to, right? Like, but was your intention to hurt was your intention to mock anyone? Was your intention to, you know what I mean?
Right. I know. I think about this a lot too. Yep. Like Mrs. Butterworth, I'm like, well, what is the intention of Mrs. Butterworth? And like, doesn't matter that they changed the logo of Mrs. Butterworth, and was it a good thing, or I don't know if that made sense. I'm just like,
it does. I mean, it has a direct correlation to the Redskins, right? Football team.
Yeah, right.
Right. Right. For another example of that. Yeah. Do we really want a football team called the Redskins? Right. Like,
right.
Are we really okay with that? You know what I mean? Like, some things are just inherently offensive.
Right.
Right? Some things are inherently offensive. It doesn't matter your intention. Some things are inherently offensive. So if it's not intentionality, right? That's the exception to the rule, right? It is inherently offensive for you to call me the N-word. Don't matter if we cool, not cool, best buds, not right. It does not matter. It's offensive, right?
Right.
It's not. It doesn't matter your intention behind it at any point in time. And I think that would be the exception to the rule. As far as Miss Butterworth, right? Or Miss Butterworth, was that what we were talking about?
Yeah,
Ms.
that was an
Butterworth,
example I brought. Yeah.
right. Like in my mind, so I think about Ain't Your Mama,
Oh,
the
Aunt Jemima
Sarah,
works too.
yeah, right, like the
Yeah.
Sarah, whatever. But anyway, in those situations, I think people have to go back to like the history of why those things were the way they were, like why those logos and symbolism and those things got created and how that has lived through American history. I think the intentionality behind it is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in turn, it makes that bad, right? But it still boils down to like, do we know why that was the logo? Do we know why they got put in place? Do we know the history of the company and what the social context of the company when they made this particular thing and why? You know what I mean? Like what social constructs led them to do these particular things? You know what I mean?
Right.
Which I guess isn't quite modern minstrelsy, but minstrelsy nevertheless. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I guess that's my take on it. But use that gift, man. Send me the gift when we get off.
Oh man. I because she's like so dramatic, it like just cracks me up every time I see it. Okay, so last question, if it's okay to bring up your son, like what do you try to teach your son about communication?
First off, all parents should teach their children sign language because it gives them a way to communicate before they're able to verbalize what it is they want, and it'll save you a lot of time in terms of like crying and stuff, because they'll actually be able to tell you what the problem is before they're able to verbalize it. So that's a quick tip to all the parents out there. You might want to hop on the baby signs ASAP, right? And that's like studies have proved. So that's number one. But in terms of communication to my son, number one, I work in education a lot, and I want him to have the space to communicate in a way that isn't like under the confines of what he should or should not do or be, right? Like when I grew up, for example, you couldn't cry. Like men don't cry, boy. Like we don't cry. We're men. We're right, like that type of thing. So I try to like challenge those things and create safe spaces where my son is able to communicate open and honestly about what it is he's going through, feeling, etc. And like whatever his reaction or expression is, that be okay. Like it be room for that to exist. But I also try to teach him to give other people the same opportunity. And right now he's not a master of that, obviously, because he's 5. Because he's 5. But in terms of communication, I think that if nothing else is what I try to teach my son. My favorite quote in the world ever spoken by any human being ever is everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. And to me, what that says is in every human interaction that I enter, that person has something to teach me. Right? They have some information that I don't yet possess. And I should be intentional about giving value to what it is they say and communicate to me because it could help me. I could learn something. More importantly, it also lets me know that I have something to teach them, right? Because communication is a two-way street. Right. And I also possess some information that they don't have. And I should be willingly imparting that information to other people in my interactions so that they left more knowledgeable than they came when they interacted with me. And that's what I teach my son about communication, that that's every awesome. Interaction that he has is the potential to teach and learn, every single last one of them. And he should value human interaction and communication because he's going to be a much more well-rounded and thoughtful individual if he approaches human interaction through the lens of having something to gain or benefit and something to impart or give as well.
It sounds like, if I were to boil it down, you're teaching your son to listen,
Yes.
I was just thinking
Yeah.
about entitled people. Not recently, I've always noticed a correlation in
Mhm.
entitlement and not having the skill set to listen. So
Right,
that
right,
was
right. There's one thing to listen for understanding, and then there's another thing to listen to respond, right?
right.
Active listening,
Right.
like
Active listening.
participatory listening, right? Is a skill, man. It's a skill. So that for me as a father is the most important gift I could ever give to my son in terms of communication.